Hello. So let's talk about heart rate. And why would you even care about heart rate in cycling? Well, essentially, your heart is your engine. Your legs are your pistons. And you would notice that any serious car racer or enthusiast would always have a dedicated tachometer, just so they would see how fast their engine is, pushing those pistons and so on. Basically, that's the RPM, right? And they know that when they go to the red line and they need to shift and so on. So it's the same thing with your heart rate. But before anything else, once you get into serious cycling, you need to consider the fact that cycling is supposed to make us healthy, and not kill us. So if at any point you don't feel comfortable when you're pushing hard, maybe it's high time that you consult with your GP, your doctor, just to make sure that you don't have any heart problems and, just to be on the safe side. So aside from your heart rate telling you whether you're still alive or you're dead, heart rate is very important when you're pacing yourself, when you're doing hard efforts, like say a very difficult climb, or you're just trying to keep up with a group in a fast ride. It's very important that you know your heart rate zones. All right. Your heart rate is a very good pacing tool because it tells you about how your body is doing, like how much your body is suffering. It doesn't tell you how hard you're pushing. It tells you how you're reacting to the way you are pushing. So it's very different from a power meter. A power meter would tell you how hard you're pushing, right? But your heart rate will tell you how your body is reacting while you're pushing, right? Very different. You need to know your functional threshold heart rate or your lactate threshold heart rate. They are one and the same. When people say LTHR, it's essentially your FTHR. Your FTHR or your LTHR is the maximum heart rate that you could sustain for an hour. In my case, I've rated myself around 173 BPM. To measure your lactate threshold, you need to ride full on for an hour, right? I would suggest that you take the first 10 minutes to warm up, just to loosen the muscles, and then maybe in the last 2 minutes of that 10-minute warm-up, you push a little bit harder just to tell your heart, okay, you're gonna do something that's gonna hurt. And then take a bit of rest, a few sips of water, and then just ride full on for an hour. You might find it boring, but anything that's worth doing is gonna be hard and sometimes boring. So ride full on for an hour. You might notice that the first few minutes your heart rate will be quite low because it takes a while for it to kick in. And so sometimes you're gonna be forced to do or to push harder than usual. And that's fine, because later on you would realize, oh crap, I'm actually pushing too hard. Maybe I should, ease up a bit. And then you'd realize that, okay, this is the pace I'm gonna be doing for an entire hour. And when you're done, just look at your average heart rate, and that is your lactate threshold or your functional threshold heart rate. So now that you've got your lactate threshold heart rate, how do you make use of it? Well, you can use it to pace a very long effort. Like for example, if you have a climb that would last for 30 minutes, what you can do is power up until you hit your lactate threshold. In my case, it's around 173 BPM. So as long as the gradient is pretty much constant, I would keep my heart rate around 173, right? It may go up or down just a tiny bit, but that's fine. And sometimes when the gradient settles like to maybe 3% less, then my heart rate would also drop to maybe 167, 168. And then when the gradient pitches up by, say maybe it hits 18% or 20%, then maybe my heart rate would jump to like 179, sometimes 180. But that's fine. As long as you're keeping your heart rate average around your lactate threshold, you know that you're not pushing too hard or you're not pushing too slow. And that's essentially how you would pace a climb. And here's an extra tip. So my lactate threshold is 173 BPM. So I know that I can sustain that effort for an hour. Now, supposing the climb is only 30 minutes long, it means that I can actually push harder, right? But you don't want to risk it. Like, okay, this is only 30 minutes and maybe I can push at 178, right, from the get-go. Now, don't do that. What you do is settle at your lactate threshold, and maybe on the last kilometer of the climb, that's when you push harder. Push to like 178 or 179. And you're pretty much confident that you can make it to the top without dying. Because if you can do 173 for an hour, then probably you can do 178 for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So overall, you'll be faster on that particular climb. The mistake that most people do, especially those that are scared of climbing, is that once they see the road pitch up, they panic and then they just start pushing as hard as they can. And they won't even get to the middle of the climb and they would die. You know, like they can't even push anymore because they don't know how to pace. Now, another thing to consider is that your heart rate actually drifts when you get tired. So for example, my lactate threshold is 173 BPM. When I'm already tired, it might actually drift higher to about 176. So for the same effort, my heart rate is actually higher because I'm already tired. It means that if I still pace my climb according to my lactate threshold of 173, it means that I'm actually pushing slower, but it also guarantees that I can finish the climb, right? Because I'm already tired. I'm not supposed to be pushing as hard as when I was fresh. It makes a lot of sense, right? So your heart rate drifting higher is actually your body telling you, hey, you're already tired, you shouldn't be pushing this hard anymore. And this is why pacing with the heart rate is actually superior to pacing with a power meter. With a power meter, right, supposing that your FTP is 300 watts, by definition, your FTP is the maximum power you can push for an hour. But you can only do that if you are fresh. Because when you do an FTP test, you need to be fresh, right? So when you're already tired and you try pushing 300 watts for an hour, you won't make it. It would never work. You'll fail. So here's an example of how to apply the concepts that we have learned so far. This is a ride, a big one. That's 3 peaks. It's like big climbs, like 3 category 2 climbs, right? The first one is Mount Tambourine, which is the easiest of the 3. Mount Tambourine is 6.6 kilometers of 6% average. You can see that my heart rate here is at 174 average, right? For 28 minutes I pushed for 174. My LTHR is 173, so pretty much bang on. And the next climb is 4.6 kilometers at 8.3 average. I pushed at 172 BPM average for 25 minutes. Again, pretty much bang on with my lactate threshold of 173. Now notice that we've already done 1800 meters of climbing by the time we got to the final climb. So you would notice that when we did the final ascent, my average heart rate is now at 178 BPM at the same effort. This is an example of how your heart rate drifts higher for the same amount of effort, right? I feel exactly the same way as the previous two climbs, but now my heart rate is a lot higher. And this is also a more difficult climb, like sustained 13% gradients and pitches up to about 15%. This is a hard climb, and at this point the temperature was already at 34 degrees centigrade, so this felt a lot harder than the previous two climbs. Something that's equally important as knowing your lactate threshold is also knowing your recovery rate. Supposing that you push at 170 BPM, if you stop pedaling, your heart rate should drop by 20 BPM in just a minute. Meaning, if I stop pushing for 1 minute, my heart rate should drop from 170 to 150 BPM. That's the bare minimum, right? Mine drops to 140 in just a minute. So like 30 BPM per minute recovery rate. Anything less than 20 BPM per minute means there must be something wrong with your heart and you need to check with your GP. I would say that this is even more important than just knowing your lactate threshold. So get serious with your heart. And that's it for this episode. I hope you learned something. And I hope that you could apply it to your pacing, to your climbing. You know, get your LTHR and then start pacing your climb centered around your LTHR. If you've done it before at full gas, you might notice that you'd be slower, but then when you get to the top, you know, you don't feel like you're dying. So yeah, hopefully this would improve your cycling. And yeah, feel free to comment and tell me about what you think about this video. Thanks. Until next time.